Wanting to surprise his wife, the husband made soup for breakfast and brought it to her in bed. But Marianne noticed a strange smell coming from the bowl. She didn't eat it. That evening, she reheated the same soup and served it to her husband instead, just to see. But 20 minutes later, Marianne woke up with the uneasy feeling that someone else was in the room. Through the pale blue curtains, thin and faded from years of sun, the same ones they'd bought back in '92, a stubborn beam of May sunlight cut across the air, lighting up tiny specks of dust dancing in the space. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed with an almost desperate hum. The groundskeeper, as always, had started right at 8, never mind that it was Saturday. Someone across the street was blasting music, and kids were already shouting in the yard below. Just another Saturday morning in their old apartment block on the edge of the city. Marianne shifted her gaze, and froze. Walter was standing by the bed, holding a large wooden tray. On it sat a deep bowl of soup. It was one of the old bowls from the set they'd inherited from her mother. The blue cornflowers around the edge had long since faded from too many hot washes, but Marianne still cherished that dishware. It was the last thread connecting her to her childhood home. "Morning, sleepyhead," Walter said, smiling in a way that felt oddly stiff, like a pair of new dentures not yet broken in. "Thought I'd spoil you today. You always say I don't give you enough attention." Marianne pushed herself up on her elbows, her neck cracking in protest. Lately, her whole body felt wooden in the mornings. Getting older was no joke. 56, her grandmother used to say that after 50, every morning is a lottery. What's going to hurt today? "Soup for breakfast?" she asked, tucking a loose strand of graying hair back under her nightgown. "Since when do you make soup?" In 23 years of marriage, Walter had never once brought her breakfast in bed. Not even when she'd had the flu with a fever, back when their son Jesse was still a toddler, she'd had to get up and make her own tea. A memory from 13 years ago surfaced, her 2-week stay in the hospital with pneumonia. Walter had come to visit her with oranges. Twice. No flowers. No special gestures of care. "I've got work, you know how it is," he'd said. And she had understood. Life hadn't exactly been generous to them. They had to hustle just to get by. And now, soup in bed on a regular Saturday. "I got up early, thought I'd finally clear the balcony. Remember how you kept saying you wanted to plant flowers out there?" He gently set the tray on her lap, steadying the edge with one hand. "Then I thought, why not do something nice for my wife? I can be thoughtful too, you know." It was that, too, that stuck with Marianne. Like he was trying to justify something. She looked down at the bowl. Just ordinary chicken noodle soup, the kind she'd made 100 times. The broth looked right, a bit oily on the surface, little golden circles of fat, a few chopped green onions floating on top. Everything seemed normal. But the smell, something was off. Way too much garlic, which Walter usually avoided because of the chronic gastritis he'd had since his army days. And there was something else, something bitter, almost almond-like. Marianne's mouth suddenly went dry. She remembered a documentary she'd watched last week about famous poisoners. They'd mentioned how potassium cyanide smelled exactly like that, bitter almonds. She'd even thought at the time, I wonder how many people would recognize that smell before it's too late. "I'm not feeling too well," she said, carefully sliding the tray away so the soup wouldn't spill. "Been having a headache since morning. You know how I get when the weather's about to change." She tried to sound casual, but her voice trembled. Maybe it was just last night's crime show getting to her, the one about serial killers they'd watched way too late. "Come on, soup will help," Walter insisted, nudging the tray back toward her. "My grandma always said chicken broth is the best cure for anything. Just a few spoonfuls. I made it for you." Marianne noticed his knuckles were white from gripping the edge of the tray. The skin on his forehead had creased into fine lines, the same way it always did when he was anxious. He'd looked just like that when the school called about Jesse's pranks, or when letters came from the tax office back during their small business days. Not a good sign. Suddenly, she remembered overhearing a phone call he'd had about a month ago, by pure accident. I can't live like this anymore. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. I'll handle it. Don't worry, he'd said, standing in the kitchen, while she froze in the hallway, not daring to walk in. Back then, she'd assumed it was about money. Maybe he was in debt again. Ever since their workshop shut down, money had been a constant stressor. But what if it wasn't about money? What if there was someone else? It sounded ridiculous at their age, but how many stories were there of men in their 50s leaving their wives for younger women? Just recently, their neighbor upstairs had left his wife for one of his students. He was a college physics professor. Divorce, scandal, messy property split, the whole building had been buzzing about it. What if Walter was the same, just too cowardly to admit it? No, poisoning was way too extreme, even for him. Who would even think of solving marital problems like that? Really, sweetheart, I just can't eat right now, she said, forcing a smile as her lips cracked from the dryness. Put it in the fridge, I'll have it later once the painkiller kicks in. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment? Annoyance? Fear? Marianne couldn't quite place it. But her gut, the same gut that once stopped them from investing all their savings into a bank that went bust a month later, was screaming now, something's wrong. Seriously wrong. Suit yourself, he said. He shrugged and picked up the tray. His hands were visibly shaking. Just don't say I don't care about you. It's getting cold, you know. Once the door closed behind him, Marianne finally exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her heart was pounding in her throat, like after a sprint. Why was she so scared? This was Walter, her husband, the man she'd spent the best years of her life with. The father of their son, who now lived in another city and only visited on major holidays. Walter, who knew all her habits, all her weaknesses, who'd seen her at her strongest and her most broken. No. Something was definitely off. The morning soup. The sudden affection. That strange smell. It was like one of those old crime novels, where the killer used food to get rid of a witness. But in their case, who was the witness? And to what? Another unsettling memory came to mind. A month ago, she'd been digging through the closet, looking for an old photo album for her school reunion. Instead, she found a yellowed medical reference book from the 1980s. Inside were strange handwritten notes in the margins, clearly in Walter's handwriting. The pages on poisons were heavily marked, underlined phrases, exclamation points, numbers scrawled in the margins. When she'd gone to show it to him, Walter had practically snatched the book from her hands, saying he was getting rid of old junk. At the time, she figured he just couldn't stand clutter. But now. Later, she'd noticed him quickly tucking away some papers the moment he heard her footsteps. She hadn't thought much of it then. Everyone's entitled to a little privacy, right? Maybe he was planning a surprise for their upcoming anniversary, just a month away. But that didn't explain the fear in his eyes when she walked into the study without knocking. And lately, he'd been locking himself in the bathroom more and more, always with his phone. One night, Marianne woke up with a sharp flare of pain from her osteochondrosis. Her neck was so stiff she couldn't turn her head. That's when she realized Walter wasn't in bed. That had never happened before. He always slept like a rock, from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, without fail. She found him in the kitchen with his laptop. As soon as he saw her, he quickly shut it and said he couldn't sleep and decided to get some work done. But Walter had been retired for 3 years, ever since the home appliance repair shop he ran with his partner had closed. What kind of work happens at 3 in the morning? Marianne quietly got out of bed and walked to the window. Her legs throbbed with that familiar ache from varicose veins. She really needed to see a doctor, but never found the time. And with their pension, it felt like a luxury. From the 5th floor, she could see the playground, now filled with little kids running around under the watchful eyes of young moms and grandmas. One of them, she thought it was the neighbor from the first floor, waved when she spotted Marianne at the window. She waved back without thinking. She used to sit there too, back when Jessie was small, while Walter was always off working to support the family. Life had been simpler then, hard, yes, but clear. Survive, earn enough for food, clothes, and books for Jessie. Save up for their own place. And they did it. They bought this apartment with a mortgage, put Jessie through school, even sent him on an internship abroad. Sure, Walter's parents had helped, but still, they'd managed. Jessie. She really should call him, see how he's doing. Lately, he barely called. Always busy with his new job. Something in programming. He was working on a project, but she'd never quite understood what exactly. That's how the world worked now, parents no longer knew what their kids actually did. But first, she had to figure out what was going on with her husband. Because if her suspicions were right. No. She couldn't even bring herself to finish the thought. Marianne stood still, listening closely to the sounds coming from the kitchen. Dishes clinking, water running, the fridge humming to life, normal, everyday sounds she'd stopped noticing long ago. Then the front door closed with a soft thud. Walter had gone out, like he did every Saturday, to get groceries. It was their routine. She made the list, he did the shopping. That had been the rule ever since they had to watch every penny, and Walter didn't trust her with the household budget. You always buy useless stuff, and then we don't have enough left for food till payday. They were retired now, and you'd think those habits would fade. But Walter had always been set in his ways. She waited another minute, holding her breath like a thief in her own home. Once she was sure the apartment was empty, Marianne walked quickly to the kitchen, her heart pounding harder with every step. The normally spotless kitchen, Walter kept it immaculate, was just slightly messy. A pot of soup still sat on the stove, warm to the touch. A bowl of chopped herbs nearby. A cutting board with the remnants of garlic, minced so finely it was almost dust. A knife. Everything looked ordinary, just like after cooking any soup. But then she saw it, something strange in the sink. A small glass vial, thoroughly rinsed. No label. Dark brown glass. Compact. Marianne held it up to the light and noticed a faint whitish residue at the bottom, like salt or sugar, but finer, with a strange metallic shimmer. A chill ran down her spine. She slowly set the vial on the table and glanced at the pot still sitting on the stove. Could it be? No, that was insane. Why would Walter poison her? They had a good, quiet life. Sure, not full of passion, but wasn't that how most couples lived after so many years together? Of course there were arguments, hurt feelings, moments of misunderstanding, but this? Her mind flashed back to a recent fight. 2 weeks ago, she had suggested selling the apartment and moving closer to Jessie. We're not getting any younger. What if something happens, who will help us? And maybe we'll have grandkids soon. Walter had lost it. He yelled that he wasn't going anywhere, that she always came up with nonsense, that this was his whole life now. And he hadn't just been angry, he looked scared, like she was threatening something vital to him. But still, from a fight to poisoning. That was a line no sane person would cross. With trembling hands, she grabbed one of the baby food jars she used to store spices. Small, with tight lids, very convenient. Carefully, she poured a bit of the soup into it. Then she tucked the jar deep into the back of the pantry, behind the grains, somewhere Walter never looked. After that, she poured water into the soup bowl so it wouldn't look like anything had been taken. Back in the bedroom, she did something she hadn't done in years, she searched the pockets of Walter's jacket. The dark blue one with worn-out elbows that he wore to every important meeting, convinced it brought him luck. In the wallet she found only money. A few bills. His expired driver's license, they'd sold the car 7 years ago when the business started falling apart. His medical insurance card. A couple of business cards from doctors at the city hospital. But in the inside pocket, folded into quarters, was a piece of paper. Marianne unfolded it and saw notes in Walter's handwriting, small, neat, with that distinctive leftward slant. Cyanide. Smells like almonds. Acts within minutes. Too obvious. Not suitable. Arsenic. Slow effect, builds up in the system, symptoms resemble food poisoning. Check dosage. Thallium. Tasteless and odorless. Hard to find. Ask AK. The paper slipped from her hands like it was burning hot, landing on the floor, cheap laminate trying to pass for something more expensive. It looked completely out of place, ominous even. This couldn't be real. Her Walter, the man she'd spent more than half her life with, couldn't possibly be planning to kill her. That was just impossible. But the vial in the sink. The strange smell in the soup. That note, filled with chemical names and poison dosages. Maybe he was just writing something. Some kind of crime novel. But Walter had never shown any interest in writing. In all their years together, he'd never even penned a birthday card. Let alone an entire book. Or maybe it was work-related. But what kind of job involves poisons when your whole life you've repaired TVs and washing machines? No, the answer had to be simpler. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, their family doctor used to say, especially back when Marianne had been terrified that her headaches were from a brain tumor. Turned out to be just osteochondrosis. Maybe it was the same now. The simplest explanation, he was having an affair and wanted her out of the way to start over. It happens. Middle-aged men, caught in a late-life crisis, blow up everything, home, family, and run off with someone younger. Could Walter be going through the same madness? A recent conversation with their hallway neighbor, Mrs. Mabel, popped into her head. The former math teacher always seemed to know everything before it even happened. "Your husband's looking rough lately," she'd said, nodding toward Walter as he passed by. "I saw him near the hospital yesterday. Barely recognized him, he's lost so much weight. Is he sick or something? Looked pale. Gaunt." Marianne had brushed it off at the time. Walter had lost about 23 pounds in recent months. But she'd chalked it up to his new walking habit. He kept saying he needed to take better care of himself now that they were getting older. But now, replaying the conversation in her mind, she realized Mrs. Mabel was right. Walter really had changed. Not just thinner, he'd become more irritable, more withdrawn. He often rubbed his temples, complaining of migraines. And he'd started taking pills. Pills he kept hidden from her. Could he really be sick? Seriously sick? But then, what was with the poisons? As if responding to her thoughts, something rustled in the jacket pocket. She reached in again and found another folded sheet of paper. It was a form from an oncology center, an MRI report with various test results. At the bottom, in sweeping handwriting, was the diagnosis: multiple brain metastases. Prognosis unfavorable. Palliative care recommended. Estimated life expectancy, 3 to 6 months. Marianne felt the floor vanish beneath her. She grabbed the edge of the bed to keep from collapsing. Walter was dying. He had known all along, and kept it from her. But why poison her? So she wouldn't have to suffer through it with him, her mind whispered. A memory surfaced, something he'd said 6 months ago while they were watching a film about a terminally ill man. "I wouldn't want you to see me turn into a vegetable. I'd rather die quickly than drag you through that." She'd brushed it off at the time, laughing and saying he'd probably outlive them all. But he must have known even then. Marianne heard the key turn in the front door. She quickly tucked the papers back into the pocket and darted to the bathroom, turning on the faucet to make it seem like she'd just washed her face. In the mirror, her reflection stared back, pale, eyes wide with fear. She forced herself to breathe deeply, to stay calm. Whatever Walter had planned, she had a plan of her own now. She just had to make it until evening. "I forgot the milk," Walter called from the hallway, the sound of shopping bags rustling. "I'll run back out and grab it." "All right," Marianne replied, stepping out of the bathroom with a deliberately calm expression. "I'll get lunch started." She watched him leave. Normally, he would have picked up on even the slightest shift in her mood. After 2 decades together, they could read each other like open books. But now, he was so lost in his own thoughts that he didn't even notice her trembling hands or uneven breathing. As soon as the door closed behind him, Marianne rushed to the cabinet where he kept the laptop, the same one he'd been using late at night. Now she understood. He had probably been researching his illness, or poisons. Password. Damn. He'd never used one before. They'd never kept secrets from each other. She tried their wedding date. No luck. Jesse's birthday. Still nothing. Walter's own birthday. The screen blinked, and the desktop opened. The browser history was wiped clean. Deliberately. But in the downloads folder, she found a folder labeled simply M. Inside, dozens of articles about different poisons, oncology forums discussing euthanasia, and various medical documents. One of the files was titled, "For Marianne." Her heart pounding, she opened it. "My love, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone. I'm sorry I kept my illness from you. I didn't want you to see me fade away. The doctors said the final stage would bring intense pain, memory loss, I might even stop recognizing you. I couldn't bear for that to be your last memory of me." Marianne covered her mouth to stifle a sob. The letter was for her, but meant to be read after his death. But then why the poison in the soup? Suddenly, it hit her. The poison hadn't been for her. He was planning to take his own life. To spare her from the burden of caring for a dying man. And he wanted it to look natural. Like a simple case of food poisoning. He even brought her breakfast, something he'd never done before, so no one would question why there was soup. If she had eaten it, the plan would have unraveled. But she hadn't, and that had thrown everything off. Marianne sat frozen, staring at the faded wallpaper. They'd put it up together 15 years ago, before the bathroom renovation, before Jesse moved out, before all this nightmare began. What now? Call an ambulance? The police? Confront him? But even if she took the poison away, what would stop him from trying again? A soft notification popped up on the screen. A medication reminder. Diazepam. 2 tablets before bed. A sedative. So he really was suffering. Couldn't sleep. And he had hidden it all from her. The phone on the table buzzed. It was Jesse. "Hi, Mom," came her son's cheerful voice over the speaker. "How are you guys?" "We're fine, sweetheart," Marianne replied, surprised by how normal her voice sounded. "How are you?" "All good. Actually, I wanted to tell you, Grace and I decided to get married in August. Nothing fancy, just a small ceremony with close friends." At any other time, the news would have made her burst with joy. Her Jesse, once a die-hard bachelor, finally settling down. Grace was a good woman. 7 years older, sure, but Marianne liked her. Responsible, kind, with a medical background. But right now, the news felt like it came from some other reality. A world where everything was normal. Where Walter wasn't dying. Where he wasn't planning to take his own life. "Mom. You okay?" Jesse asked, concerned. "I thought you'd be excited." "Of course I'm happy, sweetheart," she forced herself to say. "It's just a surprise. Your dad and I will definitely be there." "How is Dad, by the way?" "I called him the other day, he seemed off." Marianne bit her lip. tell him the truth. But Walter had hidden his illness from Jessie too. Maybe he didn't want to cast a shadow over such an important time in his son's life. He's fine, she lied. Just a bit of a cold. You know how spring is, weather changes overnight. Got it. Well, I have to run. Love you both. Oh, and tell Dad to check his email, I sent photos of the new apartment. Still needs a ton of work, but it's a nice place. A new apartment. A wedding. Plans for the future. All passing Walter by, while Marianne held papers saying he wouldn't live to see August. After the call, she sat for a long time, motionless, running her fingers over the phone like it was her last link to the normal world. Then she stood up and walked with purpose to the bedroom. On the top shelf of the closet, behind a stack of towels, was their family medicine kit. She dug through aspirin, bandages, until she found what she was looking for. A bottle of activated charcoal. She slipped the box into her robe pocket. If Walter really was planning to poison himself, she had to be ready. The front door slammed. Her husband was back from the store. Marianne quickly closed the laptop, returned it to its place, and headed to the kitchen, doing her best to look completely casual. Act like it's a play, she whispered to herself. Don't let on that, you know. If he suspects anything, he'll just find another way. Lines at that damn supermarket, Walter muttered as he stepped into the kitchen with a shopping bag. Only 2 registers working out of 5. The rest are broken. As always, Marianne nodded, carefully slicing vegetables for a salad. Her hands were trembling, and she was afraid she'd cut herself. She wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders, to demand answers. How could he hide something like this from her? Did he really not trust her? Did he think she was too weak, that she'd fall apart? But instead, all she said was, "What should we make for lunch?" "I'm not hungry," Walter replied, putting groceries away in the fridge. "Had a sandwich at the store." "You can have the soup, it's still in there." Marianne froze, knife hovering over a half-cut cucumber. "The soup. That soup. I don't feel like soup," she said, trying to sound casual. "I'd rather make a salad." "Suit yourself," Walter shrugged. "I'll go watch TV. The news is on soon." He left the kitchen, and Marianne let out a quiet sigh of relief. The entire day felt like some strange, silent theater. Walter acted as if everything was normal. She pretended she didn't know the truth. He sat watching TV. She busied herself with cleaning, laundry, cooking, going through the motions even as everything slipped from her hands. At 6 o'clock, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the clouds in soft pinks, Marianne made a decision. She couldn't let Walter die. Even if he wanted to. She needed time, to convince him to fight, to find better doctors. They had some savings. They could sell the apartment if they had to. Whatever it took. She had to stop him. "Walter," she called from the kitchen, "come eat dinner." "I'm not hungry," he called back from the living room. "Go ahead without me." "No," she said firmly, "you're eating. I cooked all day." He reluctantly got up from the couch and shuffled into the kitchen. Marianne's heart ached at how frail he looked, sunken cheeks, dark circles under his eyes, that grayish pallor. How had she missed it for so long? On the table were 2 plates, one with salad, and one with the very soup he had made that morning, now reheated and garnished with fresh herbs. "I warmed up the soup you made earlier," Marianne said casually. Walter stared at the bowl like it was a venomous snake. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I'm not in the mood for soup. I'll have the salad." "No," she insisted, sliding the bowl toward him. "You made it. It would be a shame to let it go to waste." She saw the color drain from his knuckles as he gripped the edge of the table. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. His eyes darted between the bowl and the doorway, like he was calculating an escape route. "Marianne, I really don't want the soup," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I'm not hungry." "This is the same soup you brought me this morning," she said, locking eyes with him. He froze, like a deer in headlights, and in that moment, she knew she'd been right. The soup had been poisoned. "Yeah," he finally said, barely audible. "But I'm not feeling well. Maybe later." "Just one spoonful," she pressed, still holding his gaze. "To keep me company. I'll eat it too." She really did take a spoonful of soup from her bowl and put it in her mouth. Walter stared at his with such terror that Marianne's heart clenched. "Come on," she urged, "it's getting cold." His hand shook so violently as he lifted the spoon that some of the broth spilled onto the tablecloth. Then, as if reaching a decision, he scooped up a bit of the soup and brought it toward his mouth. "Don't," Marianne said sharply, knocking the spoon from his hand. The soup splattered against the wall and stained his shirt. Walter froze, his mouth half open. They stared at each other across the table like strangers. "You know," he said finally. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "I know," Marianne nodded. "I know about the illness. I know about the poison. I know what you were planning." His shoulders slumped, like someone had let all the air out of him. And suddenly, he looked so small. So vulnerable. Nothing like the strong man who used to lift Jessie high into the air, who once held her in his arms with ease, who had always seemed like the strongest person in her world. "How did you find out?" he asked quietly. "I found the notes. And the diagnosis. And the paper with all the poisons." He shook his head, as if he still couldn't believe he'd slipped up. "I didn't want you to know. I just wanted to spare you all this," he said, motioning vaguely, at his body, their life, the nightmare they were trapped in. "Spare you from having to take care of me, from watching me waste away." "You're selfish," Marianne said, tears rising to her eyes. "You've always made decisions for both of us. Even this one, how I'm supposed to live after you're gone." "Marianne. No. Don't talk. Did you really think I wouldn't be able to handle it? That I'd fall apart? We've been together for 23 years, and you still don't know who I am." She looked at him across the table, her throat tight with emotion. How many times had they sat like this, sharing dinner, talking about the day, about weekend plans, about Jessie's school grades. Just normal family moments. And now between them, this terrible truth. A bowl of poisoned soup. Unspoken grief. "You know what's the worst part?" she continued. "Not that you're sick. Not even that you're dying. The worst part is that you didn't trust me. You chose to go through this alone. Like always. I just didn't want to hurt you," he whispered. "I watched my father die of cancer. It was unbearable. I didn't want you to go through that. And Jessie, he needs you now more than ever. He's starting his life." "He called," Marianne said. "He and Grace are getting married in August." Walter looked up. For a brief second, joy lit his eyes, only to fade into sorrow. "I won't make it," he said simply. "No drama. Just fact. The doctors said 3 months. For if I'm lucky. Then we'll find different doctors," Marianne said firmly. "We'll sell the apartment. Take out a loan. Go wherever we have to. We'll fight." He looked at her with such tenderness and sadness it made her breath catch. "You've always been the fighter," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Remember in '98, when those scammers tried to take our apartment? You went to every office in town, made it all the way to the mayor. Caused a scene in the lobby until they left us alone." She remembered. She'd fought tooth and nail back then. And Walter had told her he was lucky to have her. Any other woman would have given up. She didn't. "And I'll fight now," she said, her voice steady. "For you. With you. We're going through this together, you hear me? No more nonsense with poisons. No more trying to spare me. We face it all, one step at a time. She stood up, walked over to him, and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, feeling how thin he had become. How had she not noticed before? Promise me, she said, looking into his eyes. Promise you won't try to leave early again. That you'll trust me. That we'll fight this together. He looked at her for a long moment, like he was really seeing her for the first time. Then he slowly nodded. I promise, he said at last. But I have one condition. What is it? If things get really bad. If I stop being myself, will you help me go? With dignity. Marianne bit her lip. She wasn't ready for that question. Who would be? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, she said gently. We'll deal with problems as they come. Right now, we need to understand your diagnosis, find the best doctors, make a treatment plan. And later? We'll see. He nodded, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. Tiny, fragile, but there. And now, she said firmly, you're going to tell me everything. From the beginning. When did you find out? What symptoms? What did the doctor say? I want every detail. He let out a long breath, then began to speak. About how the headaches had started 8 months ago, so bad he couldn't sleep. How one day he'd had an episode right on the street, suddenly unable to recognize where he was. How the neurologist had sent him for an MRI. And the terrifying diagnosis, a brain tumor with multiple metastases. How he'd decided to hide it from her and from their son, not wanting to ruin their lives. Marianne listened silently, occasionally wiping away tears that slipped down her cheeks. 8 months. He had lived with this knowledge for 8 months, carrying that unbearable weight alone. By the time he finished, darkness had fallen. The streetlights outside glowed softly, casting light on the empty yard. A car honked in the distance. A dog barked. The usual sounds of an ordinary evening. But for her and Walter, nothing was ordinary anymore. Did you see an oncologist? She finally asked. What treatment did they offer? They suggested palliative chemotherapy, Walter replied. But I turned it down. Why poison myself if the outcome's the same? I saw what my father went through. That's not living. And it didn't occur to you that medicine has moved forward? Marianne snapped. That what was hopeless 10 years ago might be treatable now. Even if the chances are slim, there's still chances. The doctor said I have almost no chance, Walter argued. The tumor's in an inoperable area, and the metastases have already reached my spinal cord. That was one doctor in one hospital, Marianne shot back. We haven't gotten a second opinion. We haven't talked to top specialists. I'm going to start looking tonight, and tomorrow morning we're going to the cancer center. Walter looked at her with surprise, and something else. Admiration. Disbelief. You really think there's hope? He asked quietly. I don't know, Marianne said honestly. But I know we have to try. For both of us. For Jesse. For our future grandchildren. At the mention of grandchildren, Walter flinched. The thought of never seeing the next generation clearly hit him hard. Maybe you're right, he said after a long pause. Maybe we should at least try. Then it's settled, Marianne nodded. Now, what did you do with the poison? Walter pointed toward the cupboard above the sink. In the coffee jar. I bought it from some guy. Found him online. Marianne walked over to the cupboard, took down the metal jar, and without opening it, wrapped it in a plastic bag. We're getting rid of this today, she said. We'll toss it in the dumpster near the supermarket, somewhere no one will ever find it and get hurt. And no more of this nonsense, understood? He nodded, suddenly looking like a scolded schoolboy. And in a way, Walter really had been like a child with his plan, naive, terrifying in its simplicity, but still born out of love. Twisted, misguided love, but love all the same. "What about the soup?" he asked, nodding toward the bowl still on the table. "We pour it down the toilet," Marianne said firmly. "And we throw out the pot. We're starting fresh." She picked up the bowl and carried it to the bathroom. As the poisonous broth swirled down the drain, she realized her hands were trembling. Only now, after the initial shock had passed, did the weight of it all truly hit her. Her husband had tried to end his life. And she had almost helped him do it. When she came back to the kitchen, Walter was sitting at the table with his head in his hands. "Headache?" she asked gently. "Yeah," he admitted. "They've been getting worse lately. Especially at night. You need to lie down. I'll get your pills." "Where are they?" "Nightstand drawer, in the bedroom. There's a bunch. The painkillers are in the red box." Marianne went to the bedroom, opened the drawer, and froze. It wasn't just a few pills. It was a pharmacy. Heavy-duty painkillers. Anticonvulsants. Antidepressants. How had he been living like this, hiding it from her the whole time? She found the red box, grabbed it, and went back to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water and handed him a pill. "Thank you," he murmured, swallowing it. They sat in silence for a while, both trying to process everything that had happened. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly lighting up the kitchen. Then darkness again, soft and safe, broken only by the warm yellow glow of the lamp above the table. "Let's go to bed," Marianne said finally. "We've got a hard day ahead tomorrow." He nodded and slowly pushed himself to his feet, steadying himself on the table. Before today, she might not have noticed. But now, that small gesture screamed everything his body had been hiding. How had she been so blind? Later, lying side by side in bed, just like they had for thousands of nights before, Walter suddenly said, "I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of becoming a burden. Of seeing pity in your eyes. I've always been the provider, the strong one. And now backslash. Now it's my turn to be the strong one," Marianne said firmly, taking his hand. "We're going to get through this. Together." He squeezed her hand. And for the first time in months, he fell asleep without a sleeping pill. The morning was gray and rainy, as if the weather had decided to match their mood. Marianne woke earlier than usual, just before 6, when the first pale rays of sun were barely pushing through the heavy clouds. Walter was still asleep, his breathing rough and uneven. Carefully, not to wake him, she slipped out from under the covers and tiptoed out of the bedroom. The kitchen was chilly. Marianne pulled on an old sweater, the one her grandmother had knitted years ago. She turned on the kettle, pulled out a couple of mugs, and stood by the window, staring out blankly. The night had brought unexpected clarity. The panic had faded, replaced by resolve. They had a tough road ahead, but they'd get through it. They always had. Walter appeared in the doorway, still half asleep, wearing his saggy old tracksuit, the same washed-out gray as their apartment walls. "You're up early," he mumbled, voice scratchy from sleep. "Couldn't sleep," Marianne shrugged. "Tea?" He nodded and dropped heavily into a chair, rubbing his temples. "Head again?" "Every morning," he said with a crooked smile. "It'll pass once the pills kick in." Marianne placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat across the table. The soft morning gloom smoothed out the lines on their faces, and for a second, it felt like they were young again, like their whole life was still ahead of them. But the moment passed quickly. "I've been thinking," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "We need to tell Jessie." Walter looked up, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Why?" "He's finally settling down. Wedding coming up, new apartment." "Exactly," Marianne said firmly. "He should know how little time he might have left with his dad. So he doesn't have to live with regret," over things unsaid or time not spent. Walter didn't respond right away. He just stared out the window. Then he let out a long breath. "You're right," he said at last. "You always are." He gave her a faint smile. "Let's call him tonight. After the hospital." She nodded, relieved he wasn't fighting her. Just yesterday, she'd called every clinic she could find. With help from her sister's friend at the cancer center front desk, she'd managed to schedule an appointment with the head of the department. 8 in the morning. Which meant they needed to leave in an hour. "I've got all your records together," she said, finishing her tea. "Test results, everything I could find. Anything you forgot to mention?" Walter shook his head. "I think that's everything. Last MRI was 2 weeks ago, the results are in the blue folder." "Okay," Marianne nodded. "Then get ready. We need to leave soon so we're not late." While Walter showered, she sat in the kitchen flipping through his medical files. Strange words, numbers, abbreviations. Behind those cold terms was a terrifying reality: her husband was dying. No, that wasn't how she would think about it. There was something she could do. She had to do something. That's why they were going to the best doctor in the city. And if that wasn't enough, they'd go farther. Anywhere. "I'm ready," Walter said from the doorway, dressed in what he called his formal suit. The one he wore to interviews, Jesse's graduation, and rare official events. It hung loosely on his frame now, emphasizing how much weight he'd lost. "You just need a tie," Marianne said with a wry smile. "You're seeing a doctor, not the president." "I want to make a good impression," Walter shrugged. "Maybe then he'll take me seriously." Marianne shook her head but let it go. If the suit helped him feel stronger, she wouldn't take that away. She got dressed quickly, and 15 minutes later, they were standing at the bus stop, waiting for the ride into the city. The journey took nearly 2 hours. First a ride on an old bus that left Walter queasy and pale. Then a walk to the cancer center, a massive structure of glass and concrete. They arrived at the reception desk exactly at 8, but still had to wait another 40 minutes before they were called in. The head of the department turned out to be younger than they had expected, an energetic man in his mid-40s, with an attentive gaze and a warm, reassuring smile. He spent a long time carefully reviewing the documents they'd brought, frowning occasionally and jotting notes into a small notebook. "All right," he finally said, setting down his pen. "I won't sugarcoat it, the situation is serious. Stage 4 glioblastoma with multiple metastases in the spinal cord and lymph nodes. The standard prognosis in such cases is 3 to 6 months." Marianne squeezed Walter's hand. It was exactly what they'd been told before, but hearing it again from a different specialist still felt like a punch to the gut. "But," the doctor continued, his tone shifting slightly, "there are a few experimental treatment protocols showing promising results with aggressive forms like this. Specifically, a combination of immunotherapy and next-generation targeted drugs. It won't be a cure, but it could significantly slow the disease's progression and improve quality of life. Possibly even extend life expectancy to a year, maybe a year and a half." A year or a year and a half. It sounded like both a sentence and a lifeline. One more Christmas together. One more summer. Maybe even Jesse's wedding. What are the side effects? Walter asked, and Marianne noticed how his voice had changed. There was interest now. A flicker of hope. "They're real, and not minor," the doctor said honestly. "Severe fatigue, nausea, potential liver and kidney complications. But we've learned how to manage them with supportive therapy tailored to each patient." "And where is this treatment available?" Marianne asked. "Here, in your center." The doctor shook his head. "Unfortunately, we don't have the equipment or access to those medications. It's available in New York at a specialized oncology research center, and in a few clinics abroad. But the cost," he trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. He didn't need to finish. They both knew what that meant, an enormous sum. How much? Marianne asked directly. Here, about $150,000 for the full course. Overseas, 2 to 3 times that. She quickly did the math in her head. Their savings, the little they'd put away for retirement. The apartment, if they were lucky enough to sell it quickly. Maybe a loan using Jesse's apartment as collateral. Still not enough. But if they sold everything they possibly could. Are there any support programs? She asked. In theory, yes, the doctor nodded. But the waiting list is over a year long. And in your case, he didn't finish, but the meaning was clear. I can give you contacts for a few cancer support foundations, he continued. They sometimes offer financial assistance. Also, there's a possibility to enroll in a clinical trial for a new drug. It's free, but of course, there are risks. The drug is still in testing. Marianne jotted down every bit of information in a notebook she had brought along. Walter sat silently, staring at a fixed spot. He looked overwhelmed, but in his face, she also saw something else. A new kind of resolve. When they stepped out of the office, the hallway was packed. Dozens of people, patients, relatives, nurses, doctors, buzzed like a crowded beehive, thick with pain, fear, and strangely enough, hope. Marianne suddenly realized that they were now part of this hive too. Just 2 more among many, fighting for life, clinging to every extra day they could get. Let's get out of here, Walter said, gripping her hand tightly. I need some fresh air. They walked out into the hospital's small courtyard, where patients sat on benches, some with 4 stands, some just soaking in the pale spring sun. Many were bald from chemotherapy. Some looked barely alive, others seemed almost healthy. But they all shared the same unmistakable pallor, cancer's silent signature. I don't know if any of this is worth it, Walter said quietly as they sat on an empty bench. Selling the apartment, taking out loans. For what? Just to buy a few more months of pain. Marianne felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. For life, Walter. For the chance to see our son get married. Maybe even meet our grandchildren. For Jesse to have the time to say what he needs to say to you, and you to him. He shook his head slowly. You don't understand. You can't imagine what the pain is like. Constant. Draining. The pills only help for a couple of hours, and then it starts all over again. And it's only going to get worse. Much worse. And you can't imagine what it'll be like for Jesse and me to live with the thought that we didn't do everything we could, she shot back. That we could have had more time with you, and didn't take it. He fell silent, watching a young woman with an 4 stroll slowly down the path, leaning on an older woman, her mother, maybe. Okay, he said at last. Let's try. But on one condition. We tell Jesse everything. The full truth. Including the prognosis. I don't want him living in false hope. Of course, Marianne nodded. We'll call him tonight. The ride back home passed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As soon as they got in, Marianne went straight to the computer and began searching for information, experimental treatments, support foundations, clinical trial opportunities. Walter sank onto the couch, eyes closed, worn out. The headaches were getting longer, harder to bear. Look! Marianne exclaimed half an hour later, just as Walter was drifting off. This clinic in the next city, they're recruiting patients for a new glioblastoma drug trial. And they're accepting stage 4 cases. Walter opened his eyes and gave her a faint smile. You're relentless, he said softly. Already found something? Yes. And not just one option, she nodded, sitting down beside him. Walter looked at his wife, and his eyes were full of emotion, a mix of gratitude, amazement, and love. She had always been like this. Energetic, determined, able to find a way out of anything. Like back in '96, when the factory they both worked at went bankrupt and she managed to find new jobs for both of them within a week. Or when Jesse needed emergency surgery and they didn't have the money, and somehow, she raised the full amount by calling on every friend, neighbor, and stranger she could find. "Thank you," he said softly. "For not giving up. For always being stronger than me." "Don't be ridiculous," she waved him off, though the words warmed her. "We've always been strong together. And we'll get through this the same way." That evening, as spring twilight settled outside their window, they called their son over video chat. "Hey, Mom and Dad." Jesse greeted them cheerfully, smiling through the laptop screen. Behind him, Marianne noticed Grace, his fiancée, lingering in the background. "I was just about to call you guys. I've got news." "So do we," Marianne said, exchanging a glance with Walter. "Jesse, we need to have a serious talk." His smile slowly faded as he caught the tension in their expressions. "Is something wrong?" he asked, concerned. "Yes, son," Walter said, leaning closer to the screen. "I'm sick. Seriously sick." And then he told him. No sugarcoating, no overwhelming medical jargon, just the plain, painful truth. About the diagnosis, the prognosis, the treatment options. That there was a bit of hope, but it was fragile. Jesse listened without interrupting, holding Grace's hand tighter as she moved to sit beside him, realizing how serious it was. When Walter finished, silence fell over the screen. Marianne could see their son fighting tears, blinking rapidly to hold back his emotions. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he finally asked, his voice rough. 8 months, Dad. How could you keep this to yourself for so long?" "I didn't want to worry you," Walter replied. "You've just started your new job, things are going well with Grace." "But this is," Jesse stopped, turning his face away from the camera. Grace gently placed a hand on his shoulder, then looked toward the screen. "We're coming," she said firmly. "Tomorrow." "You don't have to," Walter protested. "You have work, responsibilities." "Screw work," Jesse said, looking back at them with eyes shining from tears. "You matter more than any of that. We'll take the evening train and stay as long as it takes." Marianne felt a lump rise in her throat. Jesse had always been like this. Steady, decisive, especially when it came to family. Just like her. "All right, son," Walter said, his voice cracking. "I'll be glad to see you." "So glad." "And about treatment," Grace added, "my uncle works at a medical research center. I'll call him today, see what options are available. Maybe he can help get you into a program." "And another thing," Jesse said. "About money. I have some savings, not much, but it's a start. And we can sell the car. It's almost new, we'll get a good price. And, we were thinking, maybe we should postpone the wedding. We could save money on the reception and all that stuff." "No," Marianne and Walter said in unison. "We're not postponing anything," Walter said firmly. "I want to see my son get married. That will give me strength to keep going." "He's right, Jesse," Marianne added, supporting him. "Don't change a thing. We'll manage. What matters is that you're here." After the call with their son, they sat in silence for a long time, staring at the now dark laptop screen. Marianne felt a strange sense of relief, as if the heavy burden they'd been carrying together was now supported by 2 more sets of hands. "I was so afraid of that conversation," Walter admitted. "Afraid of seeing fear or pity in his eyes. But there was only love." "He's always loved you," Marianne said gently. "And he always will. No matter what happens." That night, they lay in each other's arms, something they hadn't done in years, not since passion had quietly faded into routine and the comfort of a steady family life. But now, they needed the warmth, the closeness, the reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Walter said, staring at the ceiling. How strange all of this is. 2 days ago, I was preparing to die, and you had no idea. Yesterday, I thought you were going to eat the poison I put in the soup. And today? Today I felt hope for the first time in 8 months. It was a strange breakfast, Marianne agreed, snuggling closer to him. But maybe it saved both our lives. He found her hand under the blanket and gave it a firm squeeze. Just promise me, he said, if nothing works, if it gets really bad, you won't keep me hooked up to machines. Don't keep me alive artificially. Let me go with dignity. Marianne was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. I promise. But on one condition. You have to fight. Take every pill. Do every treatment. Everything the doctors say. Even if it hurts. Even if it's hard. You have to give it a chance. Deal, he said after a pause. I'll fight. For you. For Jessie. For whatever time we have left to spend together. Outside, it began to rain. A soft, spring rain, whispering that soon leaves would unfurl, gardens would bloom, warmth would return. Life was still moving forward, no matter what. And they would cling to every second of it, every precious moment. As she drifted off to sleep, Marianne thought about how she'd see her son and his fiancée in the morning, how they'd need to prepare the guest room, clear out the storage closet. Simple, everyday things that now felt impossibly valuable, because they were part of the life they'd nearly lost, but managed, for now, to keep. And in the fridge, the soup still sat, the one they'd forgotten to throw away. The same soup that was meant to be Walter's last meal. Tomorrow she'd get rid of it. But in a strange way, that very soup had opened a door between them, had given them a chance to speak honestly, to choose a new path. A frightening, uncertain path, but one they would walk together. Their path through fear and illness toward hope. She didn't know how much time they had left. Maybe a few months. Maybe a little more. But she knew this for sure, they would live that time together, down to the very last minute. And not a single day, not a single hour, would be wasted. Jessie and Grace's arrival turned their quiet life upside down. Marianne hadn't even realized how stuck she and Walter had become in their routine until their son and his fiancée brought a wave of youth and energy into the house. The room filled with voices, laughter, movement. What once felt spacious for two now felt crowded with four, but in a cozy, comforting way, like it had back when Jessie still lived with them, when the apartment buzzed with his music, his friends, his endless projects. "Mom, you haven't changed a bit," Jessie said, hugging her at the train station. She gave him a tired smile, knowing it wasn't true. In just 2 days, she felt like she'd aged 10 years. The mirror showed a face more drawn, eyes dimmer, new lines she hadn't noticed before. Caring for a terminally ill husband had left its mark. Walter, on the other hand, seemed transformed by his son's arrival. He did his best to hide the pain, even when his face turned pale from dizziness, he smiled through it, trying to look healthier than he really was. But Marianne could see the truth. She noticed how he quietly took his pills after long conversations, how he rubbed his temples when he thought no one was looking. Jessie understood everything. He never said it out loud, but the way he cared for his father made it clear that he knew how serious things were. He helped Walter to his feet when he got tired of sitting, lowered his voice when he saw him wince from a headache, and chose topics that didn't demand too much emotional effort. And Grace? With each passing day, Marianne saw more clearly why Jessie had chosen her. She was a real treasure. Her medical background, she worked as an anesthesiologist in a major clinic, made her indispensable in this fight. "Look what I found," Grace said on the third evening after their arrival, as they all gathered for dinner. "There's a clinic in the next city that's enrolling participants for a new drug trial. It's a combination of targeted and immunotherapy, specifically for high-grade glioblastoma. The results from the first phase were really promising." She laid a stack of printed articles and clinic information on the table. Marianne leaned in, devouring every word. What do we need to get in? Walter asked. A referral from an oncologist, recent test results, and most importantly, Walter has to meet the eligibility criteria, Grace explained. I already spoke with the head of the department. He's willing to review the case. That's amazing. Marianne exclaimed. When can we send the documents? I already did, Grace smiled. Emailed everything this morning. I'm expecting a response in the next few days. If it's a go, we'll need to travel there for a consultation, and then Walter might have to stay for treatment. It'll be at least a month, maybe longer. But what about work? Walter asked, clearly concerned. You both only took a week off. Dad, Jesse said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry about that. I spoke to my manager, they approved remote work. And Grace has arranged to transfer to a clinic branch nearby, if needed. We're going with you. And I'm going too, Marianne added firmly. We'll find a place to stay there. We're not leaving you alone. What about the money? Walter frowned. The treatment, travel, housing, it's all going to cost a fortune. First of all, the treatment is free, it's part of the trial, Grace said. Second, I have friends in that city who offered us their apartment while they're away. And third, I've already found a buyer for the car, Jesse added. They're sending the deposit tomorrow. Plus, I talked to a colleague, he wants to buy my gaming PC. That's some extra cash. And I've listed our apartment for sale, said Marianne. There are already 3 showings scheduled for tomorrow. Walter looked at his family in silence, tears welling in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly. Just, thank you. We've got this, Dad, Jesse grinned and winked. We're going to make it. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Marianne showed the apartment to potential buyers, Jesse handled the paperwork for the car sale, and Grace stayed in constant contact with the doctors, clarifying every detail about the upcoming treatment. Walter spent most of his time resting. Even the smallest tasks left him completely drained now. Then the message from the clinic finally arrived. Walter met all the criteria to join the trial. He was invited for a consultation in a week, and if the board approved, treatment would begin immediately. This is a real miracle, Marianne said when they got the news. Not everyone gets a chance like this. Not a miracle, Walter replied with a faint smile. Grace's connections, and our persistence. But I'm scared, Marianne. What if it doesn't work? What if we sell the apartment, spend all our savings, and there's no result? Then at least we'll know we did everything we could, she said, sitting next to him on the couch and taking his hand. And we'll spend that time together. As a family. Isn't that worth it? He nodded, squeezing her hand. His hands were always cold now, one of the side effects of the illness affecting his circulation. That evening, after Jesse and Grace had left to visit her parents and take care of a few things, Walter turned to her suddenly. I want to show you something. He stood up from the couch with effort and slowly made his way to the bedroom. Marianne followed, puzzled. In the room, he knelt down in front of the closet and pulled out an old shoebox from the very back. What is it? She asked. Sit down, he said, motioning to the bed. When she sat at the edge, he opened the box and pulled out a thick stack of yellowed papers. Letters, he explained, seeing the confusion in her eyes. Letters I wrote to you over the years but never gave you. Letters to me? She asked, surprised, picking up one of the sheets. The date on it read 1997, back when Jesse was just 3, and they were barely getting back on their feet after the crisis. Dear Marianne, the letter began, today you looked so beautiful, pushing Jesse on the swing at the park. The sun was tangled in your hair. You were laughing, and I thought, despite everything we've been through, I'm the luckiest man in the world, because I have you. She looked up from the letter and stared at her husband. I don't understand. Why didn't you ever give these to me? He shrugged, smiling awkwardly. I don't know. I guess I was embarrassed. Thought it would seem silly, too sentimental. We had bills to pay, a mortgage, always running somewhere. Who had time for romance? Marianne leafed through the letters, reading fragments here and there. One about how strong she'd been after losing her job, and how she immediately went out to find another. One about the way she supported him when he decided to start his own business. One about how beautiful she looked at Jesse's graduation, even in the inexpensive dress she'd sewn herself from an old one. She was overwhelmed by how much tenderness, admiration, and love were in those lines. Could this really be their marriage, the same one that had seemed so ordinary, almost dull in recent years? There are more than 30 letters in here, Walter said softly. 1 or 2 a year. Just moments when I felt something especially deeply, you know. I wanted you to know. After I was gone. Don't talk like that, Marianne said, wiping away an unwelcome tear. You're not going anywhere. We're going to that hospital, and they're going to help you. Maybe, he nodded. But just in case, I wanted you to read them now. To know that all these years, I loved you, even if I didn't always know how to show it. Marianne set the letters aside, leaned in, and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder like she used to during their hardest times. I loved you too, she whispered. Even when I was angry. Even when we fought over silly things. Even when the routine of life got in the way. I've always loved you, Walter. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, until the sky outside turned dark. 23 years of marriage, ups and downs, joys and losses, everything had led them to this moment, to this truth spoken on the edge of the unknown. And the terrifying part was realizing that if not for the illness, if not for that strange breakfast with poison soup, they might never have said these words out loud. The next day, the apartment buyers arrived. A young couple with a small child. They walked through the rooms for a long time, discussing things quietly, measuring walls, imagining where the furniture would go. Marianne watched them and saw herself and Walter 20 years ago, stepping into this home for the first time, just as excited, just as full of plans and hope. We're ready to accept your price, the man said finally. There's just one issue, we need to sell our current apartment to pay the full amount. That might take some time. Marianne felt her heart sink. Time was exactly what they didn't have. Every single day mattered now. How much can you pay up front? She asked, keeping her voice steady. 1/3, the man said after a pause. That's all our savings. The rest would come after we sell ours, but that could take a month, maybe 6 weeks. Marianne thought for a moment. All right, she nodded. But I'll need some kind of guarantee that the rest will come on time. Of course, the man agreed quickly. We'll sign a contract with specific deadlines. And, one more thing, he hesitated. We'd like to move in as soon as possible. We're staying with my mother-in-law right now and, well, you can imagine. Marianne could. She glanced at Walter, who was sitting in his chair, quietly listening. He gave a barely noticeable nod. We're leaving in a week, she said. We can have the apartment ready by then. After the buyers left, Walter let out a long sigh. So that's it, he said quietly. We sold the walls that held our life. But we bought a chance, Marianne replied, sitting beside him. A chance at a future. Do you really believe this treatment will work? He asked, looking her straight in the eyes. She wanted to say, yes, strong and certain, like she had with Jesse. But with Walter, she couldn't lie, not now, not after they'd finally learned to speak the truth to each other. I don't know, she said honestly. But I do know we can't give up without trying. We can't just wait for the end. We have to fight, to the very last breath. He nodded, accepting her answer. Then he slowly got up and walked to the window. Outside, it was just an ordinary spring day. Life moving on, as always. You know what I think I'll miss the most? Walter said without turning. This view. Our courtyard. Our neighbors. Even the groundskeeper with that noisy lawnmower. Marianne came up beside him and wrapped her arm around his shoulders. We'll make a new home, she said. Wherever we go. As long as we're together. He turned to her with a smile. You know, he said, I was thinking, we should have a kind of farewell dinner. Invite the neighbors, our friends. The people we've shared this place with for years. Say goodbye properly. Marianne looked at him in surprise. For months, Walter had avoided any social interaction, always blaming it on exhaustion or headaches. And now he wanted to host a dinner. Are you sure? She asked. That'll be a lot, so many people, all the talking. I'm sure, he nodded. I want to say goodbye to our past before we start fighting for the future. And besides, he added, a mischievous glint in his eye, if the treatment works and we come back, it'll be awkward if we never even said goodbye. Marianne laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. It was a little shaky, but genuine. Okay, she said. We'll throw a farewell dinner. We'll invite Mrs. Mabel from apartment 3, Dylan from 6, Pearl with her army of cats. Who else? Harlan and Marjorie from the building next door, Walter added. They were always kind to us. And Sylvia from the 5th floor. She used to bring us homemade cookies when Jessie was sick, remember? They started making the guest list, and with every new name, Marianne saw Walter's face brighten. He was bringing back the good memories, the warmth, the people, the life they were about to leave behind. They decided to host the dinner in 3 days, on Saturday. Jessie and Grace volunteered to help with the cooking and setup. Marianne sketched out a simple, hearty menu, her best comfort dishes, the ones that never failed. Once the to-do list was written and the plan was in motion, Walter reached for her hand and said, "Thank you, Marianne. For everything." "For what, exactly?" she asked, surprised. "For not letting me go too soon," he said softly. "For finding the strength to fight when I'd already given up. For always being my anchor. My hope." Marianne felt her throat tighten. Her whole life, she'd believed she was the one leaning on him, that he had been the strong one in their marriage. But now she saw the truth, they'd been holding each other up all along. Two halves of a whole. "This isn't the end, Walter," she said, squeezing his hand. "It's just the beginning of our fight. And we're going to win. Do you hear me? We will win." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his skin, the weight of every moment she didn't want to let go of. She didn't know how many more moments they had left, but she was determined not to waste a single one. Not a single day. The illness that was supposed to tear them apart had drawn them closer than ever. That strange breakfast, the poisoned soup, Walter's desperate attempt to spare her from suffering, it had all led them here. Standing side by side at the window of their apartment, the one they were about to leave behind, looking toward a future with no illusions, but full of hope. Saturday turned out to be surprisingly sunny and warm, as if nature itself had decided to support their farewell dinner. From early morning, the apartment was buzzing with activity. Marianne worked her magic in the kitchen, preparing her signature dishes. Grace decorated the living room with homemade paper garlands, and Jessie and Walter rearranged furniture to make space for their guests. "Remember your 40th birthday party?" Walter asked, catching his breath after moving a heavy cabinet to the wall. "We had to shift around all the furniture back then too. How could I forget?" Marianne smiled, slicing vegetables for the salad. "All your buddies from the workshop came, my colleagues from accounting, the neighbors. We squeezed 30 people into this little apartment. And your boss outdrank every man in the room," Walter chuckled. "Then sang old Soviet songs until 3 in the morning, right up until the cop showed up. I was hiding in the bathroom with my friends," Jessie chimed in. I was 15, and we stole a bottle of champagne. Thought no one would notice, but then Mom found all of you passed out," Marianne finished, laughing. "Had to drag you to bed and send your friends home one by one." They laughed together, remembering that night and so many other memories tied to the apartment. Marianne noticed Grace listening with a smile, but also with a gentle sadness, as if she already felt the weight of what Jessie would be leaving behind. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Marianne said, walking over to her future daughter-in-law and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You'll have your own stories. Your own memories. You'll build a world of your own." "I know," Grace nodded. "It's just, you're such a close family. I've never seen my parents talk about the past with this kind of warmth." "It hasn't always been smooth," Marianne admitted. "There were fights, hurt feelings, even times when Walter and I barely spoke to each other. But we always knew, we were stronger together than apart." She didn't say it out loud, but thought, only now, standing face to face with death, have we truly learned to value every moment, every word, every glance. By 6 o'clock, guests began to arrive. The first was Mrs. Mabel, the retired math teacher who had known their family the longest. Nearly 20 years ago, she'd tutored Jesse for his college entrance exams, and ever since, she'd become something like distant family. "You're leaving?" she asked the moment she stepped in, handing Marianne a jar of homemade jam. "And where to, if you don't mind me asking?" "To the next city over," Marianne replied. "Walter's been offered experimental treatment there. We're hoping it helps." Mrs. Mabel nodded in understanding, asking nothing more. She already knew about Walter's illness. In a building where neighbors had lived side by side for decades, very little remained a secret. Next came Dylan and his wife Bernice, a retired couple who had spent their lives working at the factory. They brought a bottle of good whiskey and a photo album filled with images of the building and courtyard they'd collected over the years. "For you," Dylan said, handing the album to Walter. "So you won't forget us when you're there." Walter was deeply moved. He flipped through the pages slowly, pausing at the ones that meant the most. There was their building, just after it was finished in the 70s. There was the courtyard, still with the old metal swings. And there was the neighborhood celebration after the hurricane in '98, when all the residents had come together to replant trees. By 7 o'clock, the apartment was full of people. Almost everyone they had invited came, even those they hadn't seen in years, except for brief hellos on the stairs. Harlan and Marjorie from the next building, the young couple from the first floor, even the grumpy but soft-hearted groundskeeper. Pearl arrived with her usual stories about her cats. Sylvia, the retired nurse who had always helped with Jesse's injections when he was sick, was there too. They pushed the dining table together with the desk to create one long table in the living room. It was a tight fit, but warm and cozy. Marianne set out all her best dishes. Walter sat at the head of the table, and Marianne watched him closely with growing concern. He was clearly exhausted, despite trying to appear lively. His pale face, the sweat on his forehead, the slight tremble in his hands, it all gave him away. But his eyes were shining with life, especially when he looked at Jessie, sitting with Grace a little farther down the table. Once everyone had settled in and filled their plates, Dylan stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast to Walter and Marianne," he said solemnly. "To their new journey. May the treatment work, and may you both return to us healthy and happy." Everyone raised their glasses in unison, and Marianne noticed a few guests discreetly wiping their eyes. They knew. Of course they knew that the odds weren't great. But no one said it out loud. Instead, they chose to support their hope. "And to Jessie and Grace," Mrs. Mabel added. "To their upcoming wedding. May they be as happy together as their parents." After the toasts, the conversation became lighter, easier. People shared memories, the flood in 2000, when the entire first floor was underwater and they all helped save their neighbors' belongings. The courtyard concerts on City Day, when Dylan would pull out his guitar. Marianne listened, a lump growing in her throat. They had lived in this building for over 20 years, and these people had become more than neighbors. They were almost family. And now they had to leave it all behind and step into the unknown. "I want to say something," Walter said suddenly, and the room fell quiet as everyone turned toward him. "I just want to say thank you. To all of you. For being with us all these years. For your help, your support, for making our lives richer and more meaningful." He spoke slowly, searching for words, but his voice was so sincere it brought tears to many eyes. "We're leaving with hope that the new treatment will help," he continued. "But even if things don't go the way we want, I want you to know, you've been an important part of our lives. And wherever we are, we'll always remember this building, this courtyard, and all of you." "No, Walter," Mrs. Mabel said firmly. "Only positive thinking. You're going to get better and come back." "You absolutely will," Harlan added. "And we'll keep an eye on your apartment while you're gone, make sure the new folks don't mess it up." Everyone laughed, the tension melted away, and the evening flowed on. There were songs with Harlan's guitar, old photos passed around, stories shared, and dreams for the future. Marianne savored every second, trying to lock it all in her memory. The way Walter laughed watching Jessie sing a silly song. The way Grace gently adjusted the pillow behind his back. The neighbors all talking over each other, swapping stories from years of living in the same building. She knew these moments were priceless, irreplaceable, impossible to recreate or buy back. As night fell, the guests slowly began to leave. Each one came up to Walter and Marianne, hugged them, wished them luck, and promised to write or call. Some slipped envelopes into Marianne's hand, some with money, some with the names and numbers of doctors they trusted. The last to leave was Mrs. Mabel. At the door, she hugged Marianne tightly and whispered, "Stay strong, sweetheart. You're tougher than you think. And he'll need your strength." Marianne nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Then the door closed, and it was just the four of them again, Marianne, Walter, Jessie, and Grace. In the apartment that, in just a few days, would no longer be their home. "Well," Walter said, sinking heavily onto the couch, "now we're ready for the road." He looked exhausted, but peaceful. That evening had given him something no medicine could, a sense of closure, of peace with the past, and the strength to face what was coming. "How are you feeling, Dad?" Jessie asked, sitting beside him. "Not too tired?" "I'm okay, son," Walter smiled. "It's been a long time since I felt this, whole. Like I've gathered up all the pieces of my life." Marianne quietly cleared the table, listening to every word. She understood, Walter wasn't just saying goodbye to a home, or to neighbors. He was saying goodbye to an entire chapter of his life. Letting it go, so he could start a new fight, with whatever time he had left. The next few days were a blur of packing. They decided to take only the essentials. The most necessary, the most meaningful. Documents, medications, a few changes of clothes, photo albums, that box of letters Walter had written over the years, and a handful of books they couldn't part with. Everything else was either thrown away or given to the neighbors. As they sorted through their things, it felt like they were reliving their life. Every item held a memory. Jessie's old rattle, the one he clung to until he was 3. The first bouquet Walter gave Marianne on their very first date, dried roses, carefully pressed inside a book of poems. Seashells from their one seaside vacation in 2002. "It's strange," Marianne said, sifting through a pile of old papers. "We hold on to things for decades, thinking they matter. But when it's time to let go, we realize the only things that really matter are people and memories." "And still," Walter replied, helping her pack the photo albums into a box, "these things were part of our life. They reminded us of who we were, and where we started." On the day of their departure, Wednesday, Marianne woke unusually early. The sky was just beginning to lighten outside when she stepped into the kitchen to make breakfast. Their last breakfast in this home. She made pancakes, Walter's favorite, stacking them high on a big plate. Then she pulled raspberry jam from the fridge, homemade from last summer, and a small jar of honey. When Walter came into the kitchen, he stopped in the doorway, inhaling deeply. Pancakes, he said, smiling. What's the occasion? A new beginning, Marianne replied, placing a full plate in front of him. Now sit. While they're still hot. They ate breakfast in silence, savoring the moment. Outside, the day had fully broken, and the first rays of sun danced on the surface of a crystal vase, a wedding gift from Marianne's parents, one they had decided to leave for the new owners of the apartment. I just remembered something, Walter said suddenly, pushing aside his empty plate. That soup I brought you that morning, remember it? Marianne tensed. They hadn't spoken about it since the day she uncovered his plan. Of course I remember, she replied carefully. Why? I never told you what exactly was in it, Walter continued. It wasn't cyanide or arsenic, those are too traceable. I found a guy online who sold me some high-dose sleeping pills. If you take 10 at once, it shuts down your breathing. Makes it look like a heart attack. Marianne stared at him, not sure what to say. Why was he telling her this now, after they had already chosen to fight? I crushed them up and stirred them into the soup, Walter went on. And the worst part is, at the time, I really thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was sparing both of us the pain. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for almost taking away these days from us, he said quietly. Saying goodbye to our neighbors. Seeing how happy our son is with Grace. Just being together, really together, with nothing left unsaid. It's okay, Walter, Marianne replied, squeezing his hand. I'm glad we've had this time too. And we still have more ahead of us. If it weren't for your intuition, for your suspicion about that soup. Let's not go back there, she interrupted gently. You were in pain. You were scared. I understand. I don't blame you. Just then, Jesse wandered into the kitchen, still sleepy, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. Oh, pancakes, he grinned, taking a seat. Mom, you're the best, seriously. Marianne smiled and slid a tall stack of pancakes in front of him, grateful that he'd walked in just in time to break the tension. This wasn't a moment for dark thoughts. This was a moment for hope. After breakfast, they packed the last of their things and did a final walkthrough of the apartment. With the shelves bare of books and photos, and the little personal touches gone, the place felt strangely empty, hollow, as if the soul of the home had already left with their belongings. It's going to feel weird, Grace said, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. Living in someone else's apartment. Sleeping in someone else's bed. A home isn't walls, Walter replied. It's the people you love. Wherever they are, that's where home is. The doorbell rang. It was the new owners, the young couple with a baby. They brought the final payment, just as promised, and received the keys and documents. Marianne gave them a quick run-through on how to handle the temperamental gas stove and the moody bathroom drain. Take care of this place, Marianne said as they said goodbye. It brought us a lot of happiness. I hope it does the same for you. And then, it was time to go. They took one last look around the apartment that had been their home for so many years, then stepped out into the hallway in silence. The elevator, as usual, was broken, so they took the stairs. Jesse carried the suitcases, Grace followed with bags, Marianne had the last of the packages. Walter walked with empty hands, doctors had forbidden him from lifting anything. A taxi was waiting for them outside their building. The driver helped load their bags into the trunk, and they all got in, Jesse up front, the others in the back. As the car pulled away, Marianne turned to look at their building. Tall, gray, with peeling paint, but so familiar, so loved. A few neighbors stood near the entrance, waving goodbye. Walter reached for her hand. "It's going to be okay," he said quietly. And for the first time in many days, Marianne believed him. The ride to the train station took about half an hour. The city they had lived in all their lives passed by outside the taxi windows like scenes from an old film. The park where they used to take little Jessie for walks. The school he'd gone to. The supermarket where Marianne shopped every Saturday. The clinic they visited whenever someone got sick. The station was loud and crowded. Their train was set to leave in an hour, so they settled into the waiting area. Grace went to get tea from the cafe, Jessie watched over the luggage, and Marianne and Walter sat side by side on the hard plastic seats. "Are you scared?" Walter asked softly, watching people rush by with suitcases and bags. "A little," Marianne admitted. "But not too much, with you and Jessie here." He smiled and squeezed her hand. "I love you," he said simply. "Always have. Even when I didn't say it." "I know," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you too." And right there, in the middle of a noisy train station, surrounded by strangers, they were happy. A quiet, ordinary kind of happiness, the kind that comes when two people, after everything, finally say what matters most. The new city greeted them with cold wind and drizzling rain. As they stepped off the train, Marianne shivered and pulled her coat tighter. Walter, pale from a sleepless night on the train, held himself upright, determined not to show weakness. Jessie and Grace were already busy gathering luggage and calling over a porter. "Well, here we are," Marianne said, looking around. "New city, new life. New chances," Walter added, and his voice carried a quiet resolve she hadn't heard in a long time. Their temporary home was an apartment owned by friends of Grace, located in a residential neighborhood on the outskirts of town. A small fifth-floor walk-up with simple furniture and faded wallpaper, but clean and cozy. Most importantly, it was close to the clinic where Walter would be treated. The first few days flew by in a blur of settling in and running to appointments. Tests, scans, consultations with different specialists. Grace was a godsend. She spoke the doctor's language, understood the medical reports, and knew how to push past bureaucratic barriers to get Walter seen by the right people. "We have good news," she said one evening after returning from the clinic with Walter. "He's been approved for the new drug trial. The review board voted unanimously. They said he's an ideal candidate." "That's amazing." Marianne cried, hugging her husband. "When does it start?" "Tomorrow," Walter replied, and she saw that flicker of both fear and hope in his eyes. "First some prep procedures, then the main course. They warned me, it's going to be hard. Lots of side effects, maybe even a period where things get worse." "We'll get through it," Marianne said firmly. "What matters is, we've got a chance." At the clinic, they were given a private room, small, but bright, with a view of the hospital garden. Marianne insisted on staying with her husband, and after some hesitation, the doctors agreed. The first few days of treatment went relatively smoothly. Walter received the medication through and for, and the only noticeable side effect was growing fatigue. He slept a lot, and during the short windows when he was awake, he read or talked quietly with Marianne, Jessie, or Grace when they came to visit. But on the fifth day, the real trial began. Walter developed a fever in the morning. He tossed and turned in bed, not recognizing anyone, rambling in delirium, calling out for someone named Logan, his army buddy who died back in the 80s. "This is a normal reaction," the attending physician explained, checking his blood pressure. "The drug activates the immune system, forcing it to attack the tumor. A strong inflammatory response can follow. We'll give him antipyretics and monitor closely." Marianne nodded like she understood, but inside, she was terrified. She didn't leave his side. She wiped his forehead with cold water, gave him sips of water when he was lucid, and held his hand through waves of intense pain. "Hang on, love," she whispered when he cried out from the stabbing headaches. "The medicine is working. It's fighting the illness. We just have to get through this. By the 10th day, things got worse. The fever was joined by severe nausea and vomiting. He couldn't keep down even a sip of water. Already thin from the illness, Walter lost even more weight. The doctors switched him to 4 nutrition and inserted a feeding tube for medications. "We need to stop this," Jesse said one afternoon, stepping into the hallway with Marianne while a nurse changed the 4. "He's not dying from cancer, he's dying from the treatment." "No," Marianne said firmly. "The doctors said this is an expected response. If we stop now, everything he's gone through will be for nothing." "But he's suffering," Jesse said, his voice full of desperation. "Can't you see what this is doing to him?" "I do," Marianne whispered. "Believe me, I see every second of it, every grimace, every cry. But I also see how he's fighting. He hasn't given up, Jesse. And neither should we." On the 12th day, the fever broke. The nausea eased. Walter was able to drink water on his own and even managed to eat a little broth. The doctors performed an MRI and cautiously shared the first bit of good news. "The tumor has shrunk by 15%. That's a strong response at this stage," the head of the department told them, showing the scans. "Better than we expected. We'll continue treatment." From then on, each day brought small but meaningful victories. Walter began standing up on his own, first for a few minutes, then for longer stretches. His appetite started to return, slowly but surely. He could walk to the hospital garden with Marianne's help and sit on a bench, watching the other patients. "You know what's the most amazing part?" he said one day, as they sat in the sun. "The headaches, they're almost gone. For the first time in months, it doesn't feel like my brain's being ripped apart." Marianne clung to those words like a lifeline. If the pain was fading, it meant the treatment was working. It meant there was still hope. Weeks passed. Jesse and Grace's wedding day was approaching. At first, they had wanted to postpone it, but Walter insisted that it go ahead as planned. He was making incredible progress in his recovery, as if the thought of the upcoming celebration gave him new strength. "I have to walk my son down the aisle," he would say stubbornly, pushing through yet another lap around the hospital corridor, building up his stamina. The wedding was set for August 10th, almost 3 months after they arrived in the new city. By then, Walter had completed 2 full rounds of experimental therapy and was preparing for the 3rd and final phase. The results had exceeded every expectation. The tumor had shrunk by nearly 70%, and the spinal metastases had completely disappeared. The doctors called it a medical miracle and were planning to publish a case study in a scientific journal. "I told you," Marianne whispered, hugging her husband when they heard the news. "I knew you were strong enough. I knew you could do this." He smiled at her with that new kind of smile he had since getting sick. A little sad, but full of wisdom and peace. "It's not the end of the road," he said, "but I'm grateful for every single day I've had, because of you. Because you didn't let me give up." Jesse and Grace's wedding took place in a small restaurant by the river. A modest ceremony, just close family and friends. Grace's parents, a few friends, some of Jesse's co-workers. And, of course, Walter and Marianne. Walter was still thin, and the thick hair he once had was now sparse and gray from the chemo. But in the sharp, elegant suit Marianne had bought just for that day, he looked dignified, even regal. He walked his son down the aisle on his own, without help, his eyes shining with pride and joy. Marianne watched them, her heart full of love. Her men, her anchor, her whole world. How close they had come to losing it all. If that morning, she hadn't noticed the strange smell in the soup, if she had taken a sip. "What are you thinking about?" Walter asked, coming up beside her after the ceremony, as the guests wandered off across the room. "How strange everything turned out," she replied. "That breakfast, your attempt to leave us. How one decision can change everything." "I was a fool," he said quietly. "Thought I was doing the right thing for everyone. But really, you almost took this from us, she said, nodding toward Jessie and Grace, who were dancing slowly, completely lost in each other. You almost took away our chance to be a family. He lowered his head, ashamed. Every single day, I thank fate that you saw through me. That you didn't eat that soup. That you were stronger, and wiser, than I was. Just then, Jessie came over, smiling and holding a glass of champagne. Dad, you promised the bride a dance, he said. Grace is waiting, no backing out. Walter laughed. A real, easy, carefree laugh, the kind he hadn't had in a long time. I'm coming, he said as he stood up. A man doesn't get an honor like that every day. Marianne watched as he danced with Grace. Carefully, still unsteady from the weakness that lingered in his body, but with grace and warmth. Her husband, the man who, just a few months ago, was preparing to die, was now dancing at his son's wedding. If that wasn't a miracle, what was? After the wedding came the final stage of treatment. The hardest part, the doctors warned. The dosage was increased, and another experimental drug was added. Walter grew weaker again. The pain and nausea returned. But this time, he handled it differently, with the quiet strength of someone who had found a reason to endure. It's strange, he said one night when he couldn't sleep from the pain. They were sitting together on his hospital bed, wrapped in each other's arms. I used to be so afraid of suffering that I was ready to die just to avoid it. Now, I'd take any pain, just to keep living. What changed? She asked softly. I realized how precious each day is, he answered simply. Every hour with you, with Jessie, with Grace. I learned that even pain has meaning if it brings you closer to something that matters. And also, he paused, choosing his words, I stopped being afraid. Of what? Everything. Death, pain, helplessness. When I planned to poison myself, it was fear that made me do it. But that fear is gone now. Marianne held him tighter, breathing in the faint scent of hospital soap on his skin, feeling the sharp outline of his ribs beneath her fingers, listening to the beat of his heart, alive, strong, stubborn. By the end of September, the treatment was complete. The final MRI showed less than 10% of the primary tumor remained, and all metastases had vanished. It didn't mean full remission, the doctors explained, but it was enough to be cautiously hopeful. We'll monitor you every 3 months, the lead researcher said as he shook Walter's hand during discharge. You'll continue on maintenance meds at home. And of course, contact us right away if any symptoms come back. But between us, he lowered his voice, I've never seen such a dramatic response to therapy in a stage 4 glioblastoma case. You're either incredibly lucky, or medicine just made a breakthrough. Maybe both, Walter replied, glancing at Marianne as she packed their things. But I had something to fight for. They returned to the small apartment they were renting. Jessie and Grace had settled into their own place nearby, close to Grace's work, but they visited often. Life was beginning to settle into a new rhythm. What do we do next? Walter asked one day as they sat together on the little balcony, looking out over the autumn courtyard. Do we go back home? She hesitated. After everything they'd been through, their old home, their old city, felt like something from another life. Something distant. Here is where their new life had begun. The life after illness. After almost losing everything. What do you want? She asked, looking over at him. He looked different now, thinner, with deep lines etched into his face from months of fighting, and hair that had gone mostly gray. And his eyes had changed too, deeper, wiser. I want to be wherever you are, he said simply. Wherever our family is. And a home. A home you can build anywhere. Marianne nodded. She felt the same. Then let's stay, she decided. At least for now. The best doctors are here, they know your case. Jessie and Grace are close. And besides, she smiled, you always said you wanted to live in a big city. Not under these circumstances, Walter smirked. But there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes. Still, there's actually a lot I want to see here. Once I'm stronger, I want to visit the art gallery. And the museum. And the Museum of the Arctic and Antarctic. I used to dream about being a polar explorer when I was a kid. Seriously? Marianne blinked, surprised. You never told me that. There's a lot I never told you, he sighed. I always thought, someday. I'll get around to it. And then I realized, someday might not come. She reached for his hand. That familiar, calloused hand with the old scar on his thumb and the veins that stood out just beneath the skin. Now we do have time, she said softly. And we're not going to waste it. In October, Mrs. Mabel called, just to check in. How they were, how Walter was doing, how they were settling in. Marianne told her everything, about the treatment, the results, the decision to stay. How's our old apartment, she asked. The new owners taking care of it? They seem like good people, Mrs. Mabel replied. They started renovations, actually. New wallpaper, new flooring. But maybe that's for the best. A fresh start is always a good thing. A fresh start. Yes, that was the perfect way to describe what had happened to them over the past few months. It was as if they'd been reborn, given a second chance. A chance to truly know one another. A chance to say all the things they'd left unsaid. A chance, maybe, to live many more happy years together. In November, with the first snowfalls already blanketing the city and the days growing short, Walter surprised Marianne with an unexpected gift, 2 tickets to the ballet, Swan Lake. You always said you wanted to see a real ballet, he said, handing her the envelope. Remember? Back when we were young and dreamed about going to the theater but could never quite afford it. Marianne was moved to tears. He remembered. All those years, and he had remembered that small, passing wish, probably something she'd said during the first years of their marriage. The evening at the theater was magical. Marianne wore a new dress bought just for the occasion. Walter was in a suit that now fit better as his body slowly regained strength. The sparkle of crystal chandeliers, velvet seats, majestic music, and graceful dancers on stage, it all felt like a dream, a fairy tale, something too beautiful to be happening to them, 2 ordinary people from a small provincial town. After the performance, they wandered the city streets for a long time, despite the cold and their tired feet. They admired the lit-up buildings, the river already covered with a thin layer of ice, and the stars that still managed to shine through the city glow. Can I ask you something strange? Walter said suddenly as they stood on a bridge, staring down at the dark water. Of course, Marianne nodded. Have you ever regretted tying your life to mine? He kept his gaze fixed ahead, not daring to look at her. Spending your best years with someone who didn't even know how to show you how much he appreciated you. Marianne looked at him in surprise. Then she took his face in her hands and gently turned it toward her. Never, she said firmly. Not for one day. You gave me what mattered most, Jessie, our family, our home. You were always there, even if you didn't say all the right words. And even now, after everything we've been through, I wouldn't change a thing. They stood in the cold wind, holding each other, and in that moment, Marianne understood something simple and true: happiness doesn't come from a perfect life, or from the absence of struggles. It comes from going through it all together, hand in hand, supporting each other through the darkest times. They got home late. Marianne put the kettle on and pulled out the cookies she had baked that morning. Walter sat in his chair, staring thoughtfully out the window. What are you thinking about? She asked, setting a steaming mug of tea in front of him. About the strange twists of fate, he said. How close I came to losing all of this. One decision, one action, and none of it would have happened. No treatment. No Jessie's wedding. No night like this at the theater. Marianne sat down next to him and took his hand. But you made the right choice, she said. In the moment that mattered most, you chose life. No, Walter shook his head. You made the choice for both of us. When you didn't drink the soup. When you figured out what I was planning. When you made me fight. You've always been the stronger one, Marianne. Not stronger, she replied. We balance each other. You were always the backbone of this family. And when your strength ran low, it was my turn to hold you up. That's what real family is. That's what real love means. He pulled her close, and they sat like that for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock and the wind outside the window. A whole life was still ahead of them. Maybe not as long as others, maybe filled with new challenges, but in that moment, they were completely, peacefully happy. Far away, back in their old apartment, the new owners were beginning their own story. Maybe they, too, would face struggles. Maybe they, too, would have to fight for their happiness. But the walls, still holding the memory of love and resilience from the lives lived before, would protect them, just as they protect anyone who truly loves and believes in miracles. A few months later, as the first spring flowers pushed up through the melting snow, Marianne was getting ready for work. She had taken a job as an accountant in a small firm, just something to keep her busy while Walter went to his rehab sessions. As she dialed for a taxi, her eyes fell on the calendar, and she froze. It was the anniversary. The day Walter brought her breakfast in bed. The day the strange smell of soup made her push it away. The day that changed everything. She cancelled the call and walked into the kitchen, where Walter was making his signature herb omelette, a new hobby he'd picked up during his recovery. Do you know what day it is? She asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. He paused, then slowly set down the spatula and turned to her. Of course I do, he said softly. How could I forget? They looked at each other, and in their eyes was an entire universe of feeling, memories, pain, survival, and the quiet joy they had found on the other side. I wanted to make something special, Walter said, motioning to the table, already set with warm rolls, sliced fruit, and a jar of honey. To honor that day. But no soup, he added with a faint smile. Never again soup for breakfast. Marianne laughed. A light, easy laugh, like the kind she used to have in her youth, before the weight of life settled on her shoulders. Deal, she said. No soup for breakfast. Lunch and dinner only. He pulled her in for a kiss, slow, gentle, and full of that quiet tenderness that had grown between them through everything they'd endured. Thank you, he whispered in her ear. For everything. And she understood he was thanking her not just for saving his life, but for every day of their journey together. For every minute spent by each other's side. For a love that had withstood time, illness, fear, and despair, a love that had proven itself stronger than death. Outside, a new day was beginning. One of many they had been given. A day that didn't start with a strange breakfast, but with something far more precious, the simple joy of being together, of loving and being loved. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It motivates us to create new and meaningful stories every day. Don't miss our upcoming videos. Take care, and be happy.